What would you think if you found out that even a saint, in his moments of deepest silence and devotion, carried with him a list? A list of his own sins? Small slip-ups and gestures that he himself saw as faults in his journey toward perfection. Today, we'll dive into the life of St Raphael Arnáiz Barón and discover what was written on that curious chapter of faults. Get ready for a story where even the smallest actions gain new meaning on the path to holiness. Chapter 1. Who was St Raphael Arnáiz Barón? Raphael Arnáiz Barón may not be a familiar name to many, but for the Trappist order, he is a legend of faith and humility. Born in 1911 in Spain, Raphael lived a brief but intense life, leaving a legacy of profound spirituality that continues to inspire today. He was a brilliant young man from a wealthy family, with all the opportunities of the modern world open to him. However, what attracted him most was the life of silence and contemplation in a Trappist monastery. In his early 20s, Raphael decided to leave behind comforts to follow God's call. He embraced monastic life, quickly standing out for his simplicity, his love for God, and his constant struggle for spiritual improvement. But Raphael's life was not without challenges. Fragile health accompanied him from a young age, and tuberculosis soon became a major obstacle to his monastic life. Even so, he embraced his illness as an opportunity to draw closer to God, turning each moment of pain into an act of surrender and humility. This deep, sincere spirit of sacrifice is one reason why, even with such a short life, he is considered one of the great mystics of the 20th century. In the convent, his behavior was quiet, but his spiritual presence was strong, inspiring the monks and transforming the lives of those who lived with him. His faith was so genuine that in 2009, decades after his death, he was canonized by Pope Benedict XVI, becoming officially St Raphael Arnáiz Barón. The Church recognized him as an example of sainthood for our times, especially for his inner struggle against imperfections, a journey he embraced with deep love and honesty. Raphael never saw himself as a saint, but as a sinner striving for perfection. And this humble, truthful perception of himself is exactly what made him so remarkable. For Raphael, the path to holiness meant renouncing pride and maintaining constant vigilance over himself. He lived a practical spirituality where each small gesture or thought was an opportunity to draw closer to God. In this sense, Raphael was relentless with himself. He strove to live the gospel in every detail of his life, believing that holiness was not in grand acts, but in perseverance and faithfulness in the small acts of love and obedience. Raphael was certain that God's grace manifested in the smallest things, such as daily discipline and patience with one's limitations. He knew that a true monk was not someone who lived without mistakes, but someone who continuously worked to better himself. And he did this with remarkable serenity, as if he knew that each act of humility was another brick in building his soul for God. For him, faults were opportunities for growth, which he faced with a courage and honesty that many of us would find hard to match. When we learn about his life, it becomes clear that St. Raphael Arnáiz is more than just a saint. He is an example of seeking perfection through the struggle with one's own imperfections. Each small detail of his life reveals a lesson in humility and surrender, something we need so much today. He shows us that a holy life begins when we look within ourselves and confront our faults with courage and faith. And it is precisely here that he invites us to follow the same path, not through grand deeds, but through the sincerity and humility with which we deal with our own imperfections. As we follow his journey, we see that Raphael Arnáiz did not stand out only for his desire for holiness, but also for his unique way of dealing with what he called false small deviations from the perfect path he strove to walk. Chapter 2. The Chapter of Faults. After his death, something peculiar was found among St. Raphael Arnáiz Barón's belongings. In one of his habit's pockets, folded and already faded by time, there was a small handwritten piece of paper, a list of what he called his personal faults. These little notes, made with pencil, reveal a surprising level of self-criticism, even for a monk. Each item represented a behavior or attitude that Raphael considered inadequate and sought constantly to correct. These weren't serious transgressions. In fact, Many of them might go unnoticed by anyone else. But for him, they were marks of imperfection that demanded continuous self-improvement. Among the listed faults were simple actions like climbing the stairs with heavy steps or not making the salutation in chapter. He also noted distractions like wasting time looking out the windows and gesturing excessively like a layman. It's fascinating to see how meticulous St. Raphael was in identifying even the smallest behavioral deviations. This habit of self-observation shows a deep awareness of the need for constant vigilance. For him, each gesture or word was an opportunity to practice discipline and respect. What most of us would consider trivial, Raphael saw as flaws to be corrected on his path to God. Raphael's list of faults reveals something deeper: his love for perfection and his desire to shape himself into a life of holiness in every aspect. He believed that the pursuit of sainthood involved not only battling serious sins, but also eliminating the small habits that kept him from fully surrendering to God. In a sense, this list was a tool for self-awareness and humility. St. Raphael saw himself as a constant learner, someone who would never reach a point of final perfection in this life. His humility led him to see these small faults as growth opportunities. Raphael also understood that the example he set for the other monks was essential. Even in silence, he inspired his companions with his dedication in every detail. This list of small sins, in fact, reflects a life of discipline where even the slightest deviation from an ideal of obedience was taken seriously. He wanted to set an example of righteousness for others, and this vigilance was truly an act of brotherly love. He knew that by correcting himself and striving to be better, he helped create an atmosphere of holiness that touched everyone around him. Looking at St. Raphael's faults makes us reflect on our attitudes and minor oversights. How often do we ignore our distractions or small flaws, thinking they're unimportant? St. Raphael shows us that every gesture and every thought matters. He believed that a heart attentive to details would be more sensitive to God's presence. Perhaps this is one of the greatest teachings he leaves us. The path to holiness is made up of small steps, and each one of them matters. In his example, we find inspiration to watch over our own lives and always seek personal improvement without excuses. And if you want to dive even deeper into the stories and prayers of saints like St. Rafael Arnáiz, be sure to check out our ebook, 50 Saints, Stories and Prayers for Divine Intervention, available in our store. This ebook brings an inspiring collection of saints who lived extraordinary lives in search of perfection and guide us on the same path. As we follow this list of small faults, we realize that, for Raphael, spiritual discipline went beyond vigilance. It also involved intense control over thoughts and feelings. Chapter 3: The Humility and Discipline of St. Raphael. St. Raphael Arnáiz Barón's list of faults reflects his deep humility, but it also reveals the rigor with which he lived his monastic discipline. In a world where people constantly seek recognition and status, Raphael followed the opposite path. He didn't record his faults to show them to others or to display a false modesty. On the contrary, these notes were an intimate exercise in self-improvement, a humble practice between him and God. For Raphael, these small slip-ups were mirrors of his imperfections, and his goal was to refine himself in every detail. With each act of conscious discipline, he sought to shape himself in the image of Christ. He understood that true spiritual discipline wasn't just about external behavior, but an internal battle. Controlling gestures and words was, for him, a way to tame the soul's impulses and maintain full focus on God. This level of discipline is rare, even among monks. But Raphael saw every moment as an opportunity for self-improvement. If he couldn't obey small details, how could he give everything he possessed to God? For him, discipline was a way of emptying himself of ego and creating space for divine grace. Each small victory over himself was a form of sanctification, a proof of his love and devotion. This rigorous humility also showed in the way he approached his mistakes. He never allowed himself to make excuses for these faults. Instead, he faced them with courage and determination. St. Raphael reminds us that true humility doesn't just mean acknowledging mistakes, but being willing to work hard to correct them. Throughout his short life, He maintained this vigilant posture, not out of fear, but out of love for God. He knew that discipline would help him remain faithful to his vocation and walk the narrow path of holiness. His humility led him to constant self-examination, a practice many of us tend to neglect. In modern life, it's common to justify or ignore minor slip-ups. But St. Raphael teaches us the value of self-awareness and reflection. He knew that every action, no matter how small, could impact his spiritual life. When we recognize our limitations and commit to overcoming them, we practice genuine humility, an attitude that St. Raphael cultivated with dedication. This watchful posture is one of the most precious lessons he left us. Another fascinating aspect of Raphael's discipline was his patience with himself. He understood that the path to holiness is long and filled with obstacles. Even as he noted his faults and worked hard to correct them, he never lost hope or became discouraged by his limitations. Instead, he saw each failure as an opportunity to learn. His perseverance is inspiring. He didn't seek holiness as a trophy, but as a continuous path of improvement. His perspective teaches us to have patience with ourselves and not give up, even when our falls seem frequent. With this, St. Raphael challenges us to live a life of discipline and humility, where each action is seen as a step toward a fuller life closer to God. His story reminds us that the quest for perfection requires courage, patience, and constant vigilance. St. Raphael believed that every small victory over himself made him more worthy of serving God, and his life inspires us to adopt the same posture. He shows us that through humility and discipline, it's possible to walk the path of holiness, even in everyday challenges. For St. Raphael, it wasn't just outward gestures he disciplined. Even his emotional reactions and subtlest thoughts were objects of his vigilance. Chapter 4. Control of Emotions and Thoughts. St. Rafael Arnáiz Barón knew that the quest for holiness was not limited to visible behaviors. It also included control over emotions and thoughts. In his chapter of faults, he didn't only mention physical actions, but also inner attitudes he deemed inappropriate, like showing external signs of impatience or not immediately obeying the bell. These small slip-ups reveal an essential aspect of his spirituality. He believed that even thoughts and feelings should be monitored and disciplined. Raphael understood that emotions, when uncontrolled, could take him away from peace and God's presence. Patience was an essential virtue for Raphael, and he cultivated it with perseverance. He knew that impatience, even if not expressed verbally, could create barriers in his spiritual life. In moments of waiting or trial, he saw opportunities to exercise self-control and surrender to God. He accepted difficulties with serenity, seeing in them a call to trust and to abandon himself to the divine will. This control over his own emotions helped him to maintain calm and focus during prayer and times of silence. With this, he was able to cultivate an inner peace that inspired the other monks and revealed his profound connection with God. St. Raphael also paid close attention to his thoughts, striving not to be carried away by distractions or useless ideas. On his list of faults, we see items like distraction in choir and not making bows on time. For him, concentration was an act of respect for God, especially during communal prayer. He believed that letting the mind wander was wasting time that could be dedicated to communion with God. This level of attention required continuous effort, for Raphael, like us, also faced the challenge of a restless mind. Yet he persevered and disciplined himself to maintain focus and reverence. Interestingly, the way Raphael dealt with his thoughts and emotions reflects a spiritual wisdom still valued today, even in practices like mindfulness and meditation. He teaches us that by keeping a serene mind and heart, we can perceive God's presence more clearly in our lives. Raphael strove to avoid premature judgments, mistrust, and excessive worries, seeking a total surrender to divine providence. This control over mind and heart helped him live more present and attentive to God's will. Monastic life requires total surrender, and Raphael understood that achieving this surrender meant disciplined control over emotions. He dedicated himself to cultivating a spirit of gratitude, even in difficulties, recognizing that everything that happened in his life was permitted by God for his spiritual growth. This serene acceptance of trials shows that he did not see his emotions as something to suppress, but as something to guide and harmonize with God's will. By living with this spirit of acceptance and serenity, Raphael was able to endure hardships with a light and trusting heart. In St. Raphael's example, we see that control over emotions and thoughts is key to inner peace and a life in tune with God. He inspires us to be vigilant with our impulses and to cultivate a mind and heart that seeks serenity. Today, in a world where we are constantly bombarded with stimuli and distractions, St. Raphael's example is a precious reminder that peace begins within, in how we handle our thoughts and feelings. But St. Raphael didn't limit himself to controlling his emotions and thoughts. His devotion also manifested in total dedication to work, where he found a way to serve God in every task, no matter how simple. Chapter 5. Dedication to work as a form of prayer. For St. Raphael Arnáiz Barón, monastic work was not just a daily task. It was a form of prayer, an extension of his devotion and spiritual discipline. In monastery life, work played a central role, and Raphael viewed each task as an opportunity to offer something to God. Even the simplest and most routine activities, like cleaning and organizing the monastery, were carried out with reverence and love. He believed that by dedicating himself wholeheartedly to his work, he was expressing his fidelity and humility. This perspective transformed every act into an offering, where even the smallest effort became a silent offering to the Creator. On his list of faults, Raphael recorded wasting time at work and wasting time during breaks, emphasizing the value he placed on conscious use of time. For him, idleness was an obstacle to spiritual life. Time was a precious gift from God that he wanted to use in the best way possible. This dedication to work reveals a practical dimension to his spirituality. Raphael believed that by carrying out his tasks with care, he was collaborating in God's work. He understood that work, when done with a heart turned toward God, could be a form of communion, an act of love and praise. Raphael also knew that discipline in work was a form of witness for other monks. His diligence and zeal inspired those around him to see work as an essential part of monastic life. He believed that each task, no matter how simple, had value in God's eyes. His dedication was an expression of his humility, as he carried out even the most humble activities with joy and gratitude. Raphael shows us that holiness can be achieved not only in prayer, but also in sincere dedication to daily work. By turning work into a form of prayer, St. Raphael cultivated a constant presence of God in his routine. He saw his own sweat as a sacrifice offered in love. This spirit of service is something many of us lack today, when work is seen merely as an obligation or a means to achieve material rewards. St. Raphael reminds us that by performing our tasks with attention and dedication, we can draw closer to God. His example challenges us to change our perspective on work, to see it as an opportunity for spiritual growth and an expression of our faith. It's also interesting to note that Raphael viewed work as a form of active humility. He did not seek recognition for what he did, nor did he look for applause or praise. On the contrary, his focus was always on doing well what he was asked, whether it was noticed or not. This attitude reflects his total surrender to God, where the only recognition he sought was from the Lord. What mattered to him was not immediate reward, but the certainty of fulfilling his vocation with faithfulness and love. Each task completed with dedication was a small spiritual victory. St. Raphael Arnáiz Barón, with his view that work can be a form of prayer, teaches us to look at our daily lives with new eyes. He inspires us to value small actions and to see the sacred in the ordinary. Work, when done with devotion, becomes a silent act of praise, an invisible sacrifice that only God can see. May we learn from his example and seek, in our own routines, a way to sanctify every task, turning it into a living and constant prayer. And just as Raphael dedicated each moment of work to God, his heart remained vigilant even during times of rest, where prayer and silent contemplation were a sacred refuge. Chapter 6. Silence and Contemplation as Paths to God. Silence was an essential element in the spiritual life of St. Raphael Arnáiz Barón, and he saw it as a privileged way to commune with God. Amid the quiet, disciplined rhythm of monastic life, Raphael found a space where he could hear God's voice and reflect on his own faults and progress. For him, silence was not just the absence of words, but an active presence of peace and surrender. He knew that without silence, it would be impossible to perceive the subtle divine inspirations that guided him. In his view, silence was a necessity for anyone wishing to deepen their relationship with God. Raphael used silence to strengthen his inner discipline and refine his spiritual life. During the monastery's great silence periods, he withdrew into a state of profound prayer and contemplation. This was the time when he examined his heart and assessed his progress in the pursuit of holiness. He wasn't seeking immediate answers or easy solutions, but learning to trust in God's timing. St. Raphael knew that silence has the power to transform the heart and lead us to a peace the world cannot offer. He saw silence as a doorway to divine presence, a place where words were unnecessary. Even when silence was broken by tasks or interaction with other monks, Raphael maintained an inner silence that allowed him to remain constantly in prayer. He believed this inner peace was essential for handling the difficulties and distractions that could pull him away from God. Raphael cultivated this serenity with the same zeal he had in noting his faults, knowing that true communion with God requires not only external discipline, but also inner peace. This silence of the soul was, for him, a sacred space where he found comfort and guidance. In silence, Raphael opened himself to the divine inspirations that directed his life and decisions. He was fully aware that, in the noise of the mind and the world, one can easily lose direction and weaken faith. Therefore, he strove to preserve a quiet space where he could hear God's voice. This is one of the great legacies of St. Raphael Arnáiz, the reminder that we all need moments of silence to strengthen our spirituality. He shows us that, in a world so noisy and restless, it is essential to find refuge in silence to renew our faith and inner peace. Raphael's silent contemplation also led him to a deep sense of gratitude and acceptance. He learned to see God's presence in all things, from the smallest joys to the greatest trials. For him, contemplation was more than passive observation. It was a way of recognizing God's greatness in every detail. This contemplative gaze helped him face difficulties with patience and courage, knowing that God was present in every moment of his life. Raphael found in silence a strength that sustained his journey, transforming him into a profoundly resilient and serene man. St. Raphael Arnáiz reminds us that silence and contemplation are sources of peace that we can all seek. He invites us to cultivate moments of stillness in our own lives, where we can reconnect with the sacred and strengthen ourselves to face life's challenges. In his example, we find inspiration to see silence not as an emptiness, but as a space where God is present. May we, like him, find the peace and guidance that come from silent contemplation and surrender to God. St. Raphael Arnáiz Barón, with his simplicity and dedication, teaches us that holiness can be pursued in the smallest things, in every gesture, in every thought, and in every moment of silence. His life is a powerful reminder that the path to God is within everyone's reach, as long as we live with humility, discipline, and love. Every detail of his spiritual journey is a lesson in how to transform the ordinary into an act of devotion. He shows us that, even with all our imperfections, it is possible to walk a path of self-improvement, as long as we are faithful to our calling. If you enjoyed this reflection and want to learn about other saints who, like St. Raphael, sought holiness in the everyday, consider becoming a member of our channel. By doing so, you support our work and gain access to exclusive content that enriches your spiritual journey. May we be inspired by St. Raphael's example and grow in our own faith. Watch the next video to continue exploring the lives of saints and the richness of Christian faith.